there are cracks starting to appear in the Australian property market. So when someone asks you, is the property market about to crash? Or is the property market about to boom? That question no longer makes any sense because we no longer have, and I'm not sure we ever had, one property market. Different markets around the country are doing different things. That's why today we need to go through the data. We need to see what different areas are doing, what's the reason behind different areas performing differently, and ultimately what this all means for you, whether you're looking to buy a property or you're already in the market. Let's dive in. Hello, it's Nero here, founder of the Investment Rise Buyers Agency. And if you're new to my channel, hit that subscribe button because I talk about all things related to the Australian property market and the economy. Here we have data from CoreLogic looking at how our different capital city markets performed last month. We can see that Sydney and Melbourne essentially flat. Sydney rose 0.3%, Melbourne fell 0.2%. Not a lot of price movement in those two markets. Then we have Brisbane, Adelaide and Perth all rising somewhere between 1 and 2% last month, still looking very strong. Then we've got Darwin, Canberra and Hobart all falling. And if we look at our regional markets, we can see that regional Tasmania, regional Victoria, regional New South Wales, all roughly flat, but regional WA, regional South Australia and regional Queensland all doing really well last month. So the question then is, should you be looking to buy in a market that's rising right now? Or should you look at a market that's potentially falling? Maybe it's reached the bottom, maybe now is a good time to buy. Well, to answer that question, there's a few different factors you need to look at. First of all, let's have a look at the price growth trend. Let's look at regional South Australia. Last 12 months, 9.6% growth. Last month, 0.7. If I multiply that by 12, it gives me 8.4% growth. So that indicates that price growth is likely to continue, but perhaps at a slower rate. And we can do this for every single one of our markets to get a sense of what the speed of price growth is relative to the last 12 months. But let me bring your attention to two of our capital city markets. Let's look at Brisbane. Last 12 months, price growth was 15%. Brisbane is now at a peak. Prices have never been higher. Yet last month, property prices still rose by 1.1%. So if that was to continue, that would mean that we would have 13.2% growth in the Brisbane market in the coming 12 months. Okay, it's not 15%, but would you be unhappy if you got over 13% growth on your investment property, especially considering the median price in Brisbane is now $1 million? So 13% growth on that in 12 months is $130,000. But now let's have a look at Melbourne. The last 12 months, property prices have dropped 1%. Not a lot of movement. It's not a crashing market. It's just essentially flat. But if we look at last month, property prices in Melbourne dropped 0.2%. Now, if we look at an annual figure based on that rate, that means that property prices are likely to fall 2.4% in the next 12 months. So what this indicates is that property prices are likely to fall more in the next 12 months than in the previous 12 months. Look, 2.4% is no property crash by any stretch of the imagination, but it certainly shows that perhaps right now is not the time to be buying in the Melbourne property market. Now, of course, I'm just looking at trends here. Past growth is no indicator of future performance. So we can't just apply what I have said. That is just an initial indicator. We need to look at a number of other factors. For example, listings, the number of properties for sale on the market. Look, the key concept to understand when it comes to capital growth is you want to be buying in areas where demand is higher than supply. And when we look at supply, we need to look at, first of all, new builds coming on into a market. Are there lots and lots of properties being built? Because that could potentially compromise on capital growth. And the second indicator to look at is number of properties for sale or listings. Are they staying consistent or are they falling? That will normally be a good indicator for future capital growth as long as demand is continuing to be higher. Or are listings starting to increase, which could then be a cause for concern. If we look at this chart with data from CoreLogic and CBA, which looks at total listings, what we can see is that Sydney listings are roughly on par with their decade-long average, which is why price growth is essentially flat, whereas Melbourne, the number of total listings is actually 10% above the decade average. So there are more listings right now relative to demand, which is why capital growth is actually slightly negative. But then when we look at Brisbane, Perth and Adelaide, we can see that total listings are 40 and 50% below their decade average. So there just aren't enough properties there for sale for the number of people who are moving into those markets. And this is also the case in multiple regional markets, which is why capital growth in those markets are more than likely set to continue. And when we look at this next chart, which is tracking migration from overseas, yes, migration might be lower right now than what it was a few months ago, but based on projections for migration levels going forwards, we're going to be well above what could be considered normal migration levels based on the past. So what that means is we've got so many more people coming into Australia, and we're not going to have enough properties going forwards. So even though right now rental growth might be easing, rents are still very, very high, and I expect that you're going to see rents continue to increase over time, but the rate of increase in terms of rental growth might just be slower than it has been in the past, but rents will keep rising because demand is going to be higher than supply. But also, as more people come into Australia, they are going to be looking at areas that are more affordable for them, which is why I expect that in multiple markets around the country, it is going to be the lower quartile or the cheaper 25% or the cheaper 50% of properties and areas that are likely to experience superior capital growth. So what does that mean for you? It means that when you see headlines like this about lots of properties on the market in Sydney, that is not totally accurate. It comes down to individual pockets. There are certain areas in Sydney where more sellers are selling than previously, but there are other areas where supply is really as tight as a drum. This applies to pretty much every single area around the country. That's why you can no longer say, hey, is Sydney a good place to buy? Is Brisbane a good place to buy? Instead, you need to start looking at individual pockets of areas in order to do your due diligence. Yes, the median property price in Australia has risen for the 19th month in a row, but that does not mean that property prices are rising everywhere. However, there are still some great opportunities if you do your due diligence correctly. And if you'd like help with that, check out the link in the description below to get totally for free the audio version and digital version of my book. Otherwise, I'll see you next time.